The great question. Imagine waking up one day and realizing that the thing you fear most, pain, is also the very thing you keep unconsciously chasing. Not because you want to suffer, of course. No one wants to suffer. But what if beneath the surface of your decisions, under the practiced smile and the carefully curated life, pain isn't just something that happens to you. It's something your mind, in secret, needs. What if your identity, your habits, your relationships, and even your ambitions have been subtly shaped not by the desire for happiness, but by an invisible tether to pain? That might sound absurd at first. After all, we live in a culture obsessed with avoiding discomfort. We numb, distract, sedate, scroll, medicate, and chase novelty, all in the name of feeling good. Entire industries are built on the promise of escaping suffering. And yet, if you pay attention, truly pay attention, you'll start to notice something disturbing. People often return to the very things that hurt them. They stay in relationships that drain their spirit. They repeat self-destructive cycles under the guise of habit. They sabotage peace the moment it begins to settle in, as if silence is unbearable. Why? Why do we choose partners who mirror the wounds of our past? Why do we gravitate toward chaos when peace becomes too quiet? Why do we ruminate over the things that make us angry, bitter, or ashamed? Is it mere coincidence, or something far more fundamental to the architecture of the human psyche? Consider this. A person who was neglected as a child often becomes an adult who finds emotional neglect familiar. Not pleasant, but familiar. They may fall in love with people who are distant, unavailable, or cruel, not because they want to suffer, but because their nervous system has been wired to recognize that pattern as home. Familiarity, even when it's toxic, offers a twisted form of comfort. This is where the paradox begins. Because your brain, in its deeply adaptive and unconscious brilliance, doesn't prioritize joy. It prioritizes familiarity. And if pain is what you've always known, emotionally, psychologically, relationally, then pain begins to feel like truth, like safety, like identity. Ask yourself, have you ever walked away from something good because it felt too good to be true? Have you ever found peace and then ruined it with a sudden need for drama or conflict? Have you ever clung to guilt, shame, or anger even when forgiveness and resolution were within reach? These aren't signs of weakness. They're signs of something deeper at work, a pattern that runs beneath logic, beyond willpower, inside the subconscious fabric of your story. Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." What if the fate you keep blaming is just a repeated echo of unhealed pain? What if the emotional suffering you experience isn't always random, but rehearsed? Invisible scripts handed to you by trauma, culture, family, or society. Scripts you didn't write, but still perform. What if the reason you keep circling the same emotional drain is because pain has become your psychological compass? You navigate by it, you search for it, you measure your self-worth by it. And worse, you might mistake the absence of pain for emptiness. Because if pain has become the background noise of your existence, silence feels threatening, peace feels undeserved, and joy feels suspicious. Could it be that you've learned to need pain just to feel alive? This isn't about masochism. It's not about liking suffering. It's about a deeper, subtler addiction. Not to the feeling of pain itself, but to the identity that pain has built around you. The wounds you wear like armor. The sadness you use as proof of your depth. The drama that makes you feel needed. The self-sacrifice that earns you love. You don't crave the agony. You crave what it means about you. That you are worthy. That you are strong. That you are real. But at what cost? And so the question becomes, what if your pain isn't just something to heal, but something you're afraid to let go of? What would remain of you if your suffering ended? Who would you be without the story of your struggle? Could it be that letting go of pain is harder than carrying it, because it would force you to face the terrifying possibility that joy, peace, and freedom require a new identity, one you've never known, and therefore one you don't fully trust? This is the great contradiction of the human condition. We say we want healing, but we cling to what breaks us. We say we want peace, but we return to war. Not because we're broken, but because we are afraid to be whole. And now, with that question echoing in your mind, you begin to wonder, if I'm addicted to pain and don't even know it, how did this happen? Who planted the seed? And how deep does it go? Shall we go deeper? The hidden problem, its psychological, philosophical roots. To understand how you became tethered to pain without even realizing it, we must journey beneath the surface of behavior, below the layer of thought, and into the quiet underworld of your early emotional blueprint, your first memories of safety, love, and rejection. Pain, for many, didn't begin as a punishment. It began as a condition for being seen, being cared for, being enough. A child who cries and is ignored learns quickly. Expression equals abandonment. A child who pleases to survive learns suppression equals safety. A child whose needs are unmet but still clings to their caregivers is not learning to trust. They're learning to adapt. The pain is not separate from love, it is love. The result? An adult who unconsciously believes that love is always supposed to hurt. That being dismissed, overlooked, or emotionally starved is normal. That the ache in your chest is not a warning sign. It's a familiar rhythm. It's this initial conditioning that lays the foundation for an internal contradiction. You avoid pain on the surface, but you cling to it subconsciously because it once brought you something vital: connection, identity, or control. Carl Jung called this the shadow, the unconscious self, the parts of us we repress because they were once shamed, punished, or unloved. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It grows more powerful the more you ignore it. The unspoken pain becomes a silent architect of your choices. You may call it fate or bad luck when relationships fall apart, when you sabotage success, when depression returns like a storm. But the truth is, you are acting out the patterns written into your nervous system decades ago. And they feel right because they feel familiar. Thinkers like Gabor Mate have emphasized this link between early trauma and adult behavior. He reminds us that addiction, whether to substances, people, or emotional patterns, is not about the substance or behavior itself. It's about the pain underneath. The question is not why the addiction, he says, but why the pain. And if your particular addiction is emotional pain, self-sabotage, or suffering masked as virtue, then it becomes a subtle cycle. You feel pain, you respond with behaviors that create more pain, and that pain confirms the identity that keeps you locked in place. The world, too, plays its role. Society teaches us to glorify endurance and romanticize struggle. No pain, no gain. Suffer in silence. What doesn't kill you makes you stronger. These sayings echo everywhere, reinforcing the idea that suffering is not just necessary, but noble. That to be valuable, you must carry wounds. To be seen as real, you must bleed. The danger here is that we begin to attach our worth to our pain. We fear healing because it threatens to take away our story. Who are you, without the heartbreak, without the trauma, without the struggle that shaped your art, your beliefs, your strength? Schopenhauer would argue that pain is the fundamental essence of life, that desire itself is suffering, and we are forever caught in its grasp. But where he saw resignation as the only escape, others, like Viktor Frankl, offered a different view, that the meaning we assign to suffering determines whether it imprisons or transforms us. The psychological roots of your addiction to pain also lie in a little-known process called emotional conditioning. Just as Pavlov's dogs salivated when they heard a bell, humans learn to associate emotional states with particular stimuli. If, in your formative years, love was inconsistent but paired with moments of pain, criticism, coldness, chaos, your nervous system learned to anticipate discomfort as a prelude to connection. Later in life, when you meet someone stable, calm, and kind, something inside you recoils. It feels foreign, unearned, maybe even boring. Your unconscious mind isn't looking for peace. It's scanning for familiar signals, tension, uncertainty, the thrill of almost being loved. And so, without knowing why, you push away the very thing you say you want. There's also the dopamine paradox to consider. Neuroscience shows that the brain doesn't just release dopamine in response to pleasure, it also does so in anticipation of it. This means the hope of relief becomes addictive, even if relief never comes. Emotional pain that promises potential redemption, like winning someone's approval, finally being chosen, or proving your worth, can keep you hooked. Not because it feels good, but because your brain clings to the possibility that it might. This is how you end up addicted not to outcomes, but to the emotional roller coaster itself. The high of hope, the crash of disappointment. The loop continues. But what makes this trap even more insidious is that it hides in plain sight. It dresses itself up as logic, as responsibility, as identity. I'm just not the kind of person who can be happy. It's always been this way for me. I need to suffer for others to feel okay. These aren't objective truths. They're learned scripts, internalized beliefs written by early pain, reinforced by a society that feeds on your discontent, and protected by a mind that believes safety comes from repetition, not truth. The result? A quiet, ceaseless war inside you. One part longs for peace, the other part is terrified by it, and so you perform. You keep busy. You choose partners who make you chase love. You keep jobs that drain your soul. You stay loyal to patterns that burn you because you believe that's just how life works. But underneath it all, the real conflict remains unresolved. Do I want to be free, or do I want to be familiar? That's the hidden problem. And unless you confront it, not just with your intellect, but with raw, unsettling honesty, it will continue to define you. Not because you are weak, but because your pain has become a mirror, a guide, a false friend you've never learned to live without. But what happens when that pain starts shaping your reality in ways far beyond your personal choices? When it seeps into your relationships, your health, your worldview, your very sense of identity? What are the unseen consequences of living a life addicted to suffering? The unseen consequences. You don't notice it at first. That's how most quiet catastrophes begin, not with explosions, but with echoes. At the surface, your life may seem functional. You pay bills, you meet deadlines, you smile when someone greets you, you might even tell yourself, things could be worse. And perhaps that's true, but not terrible is not the same as alive. Deep down, beneath the performance of daily life, something is eroding. Slowly, silently, your addiction to pain begins to shape. Not just your experiences, but your identity, your worldview, your relationships, and your very capacity for joy. It becomes a lens so subtly tinted that you no longer question what you see through it. You begin interpreting peace as suspicious, love as conditional, happiness as fleeting, and suffering as inevitable. In time, you're not just experiencing pain, you're building a reality around it. Let's start with relationships. If your nervous system is calibrated to chaos, peace will feel threatening. If love has always come laced with unpredictability or conditional approval, then you may interpret consistency as boredom. You might find yourself picking fights just to feel something. You may become addicted to the adrenaline of conflict, mistaking it for connection. Or you may stay with people who harm you, not because you don't know better, but because their wounds match yours, like a puzzle of trauma finding its missing piece. This is why so many people repeat the same heartbreak in different forms. The names change, the details shift, but the emotional signature remains identical. It's not a matter of bad luck. It's the repetition compulsion Freud spoke of. The mind's unconscious attempt to resolve a past wound by reliving it, hoping for a different outcome. The tragedy, of course, is that until the pattern is seen and broken, the wound only deepens. Then there's the self-image. Pain subtly informs your sense of who you are. You start defining yourself through your suffering, the broken home, the betrayal, the failure, the loss. These become the chapters you read most often from the story of your life. They begin to outweigh the quiet, forgotten moments of resilience, joy, or inner peace. And because humans crave narrative coherence, you'll unconsciously seek new experiences that confirm your self-image. If you see yourself as the one who is always abandoned, you'll find ways, consciously or not, to be left. If you believe you are worthy unless you are sacrificing, you'll overextend until you collapse. This isn't weakness. It's cognitive and emotional inertia. It's what the brain does when survival becomes synonymous with repetition. The consequences reach deeper still. Chronic emotional pain doesn't just live in your mind, it takes root in your body. According to the work of Gabor Mate and other trauma-informed physicians, emotional suppression and unresolved psychological wounds often manifest as chronic illness, autoimmune dysfunction, fatigue, and inflammation. The body keeps the score, as Bessel van der Kolk famously put it. Every time you swallow your grief, silence your rage, or dismiss your inner voice, your body absorbs the cost. And so, a life lived addicted to pain is not just an emotional tragedy, it becomes a physiological one. Your very biology begins to respond to your belief that suffering is safer than peace. But perhaps the most haunting consequence is what happens to your potential. Not your career or outward achievements, those can continue even in emotional captivity, but your inner evolution, your ability to expand into new dimensions of selfhood. Pain narrows perception. It places you in survival mode. It forces you to focus on what's wrong, what might go wrong, what could fall apart. It tricks you into believing that hypervigilance is the same as wisdom, that anxiety is the same as awareness, that constant tension is the price of being alive. And so you stop dreaming, you stop risking, you stop imagining who you could become outside the prison walls of your emotional history. This addiction to pain also warps your spiritual relationship with time. You live either in the past, ruminating, regretting, reliving, or in the future, anticipating catastrophe, rehearsing betrayal, fearing disappointment. The present becomes too quiet, too still, too foreign. You begin to fill it with distractions, scrolling, endlessly consuming noise just to drown the silence that might bring you face to face with your unmet self. This spiritual dislocation leaves you ungrounded. You feel detached from meaning, from presence, from the subtle grace that exists in every unremarkable moment. You chase purpose, but find only busyness. You chase joy, but find only stimulation. You chase peace, but find only numbness. And society? It rewards this. It benefits from your quiet despair. An unhappy mind is the perfect consumer. An insecure soul is easily manipulated. A fragmented identity is quick to conform. Industries thrive on your restlessness, your unworthiness, your endless quest to fix what was never broken but only wounded. Self-help turns into self-hate masked as productivity. Wellness becomes another competition. Even healing becomes a performance. Another way to prove you're working on yourself rather than sitting silently with your raw, unsellable truth. If that sounds bleak, it's because it is. But there's something else you must know. Something even more vital than the depth of the trap. It is not permanent. This isn't about blaming your parents, shaming your past, or drowning in self-pity. It's about waking up to the architecture of your pain, seeing the scaffolding of beliefs and patterns that have been mistaken for reality. Because once you see it, once you name it, the spell begins to weaken. Pain can no longer rule you when it is recognized as a pattern, not a prophecy. And yet, seeing is only the beginning. The real transformation begins when you dare to rebel. When you start to say no to what you've always said yes to, not out of anger, but from clarity. When you start to embrace peace, even when it feels uncomfortable. When you begin to believe, quietly at first, that you are allowed to feel good without earning it through suffering. So what does it look like to rebel against pain? Not by running from it, but by refusing to be ruled by it. What does it mean to break the addiction, not with force, but with compassion? The rebellion. How to break free. It begins quietly. Not with some grand gesture or overnight metamorphosis, but with a subtle refusal. A moment when you feel the pull of an old pattern, a rising panic in the face of silence, a sudden urge to reach out to someone who has only hurt you, a burning desire to sabotage something good because it feels too unfamiliar. And you pause. Not forever. Just long enough to notice, to breathe, to interrupt the cycle by one beat. That's where rebellion begins, not in defiance of the world, but in the microsecond where you choose awareness over autopilot. Because in that space, however small, you reclaim something sacred, choice. And that single act of noticing is more revolutionary than it seems. The truth is, the rebellion against pain addiction is not about rejecting all suffering. Pain is part of life. It signals loss, grief, injustice, and growth. But when pain becomes your compass, your identity, your comfort zone, that's when it begins to colonize your life. Rebellion means refusing to let suffering become your home. It means noticing the difference between pain that teaches and pain that repeats, between wounds that need attention and wounds that have become habits, and that noticing over time becomes a form of inner revolution. Start here. Get honest about your emotional patterns. Radical honesty, not the kind that justifies pain, but the kind that unveils it. Ask yourself, what am I clinging to that hurts me? What do I keep recreating because it feels familiar, not because it feels good? What emotion feels safer to me than joy? The answers will sting, but that sting is the beginning of freedom, because once you see the pattern, you can stop calling it fate. You can stop blaming the world. You could guess hers. And stop performing suffering as proof of your worth. Carl Jung taught that integration, not perfection, is the goal of individuation. That means wholeness is not achieved by cutting out your darkness, but by befriending it. So sit with your pain, not to indulge it, but to understand it. Where does it come from? What did it once protect you from? What did it make possible in your life? Until you can answer these questions, you will remain loyal to your wounds. They will shape your choices because you never stopped to listen to what they were trying to say. And in many cases, they're saying this: please stop carrying me. I did my job. It's time to let me go. Now consider your nervous system. If you've lived with chronic emotional chaos, conflict, abandonment, volatility, then calm will feel alien. Your body interprets silence as danger, stillness as vulnerability. And so, the rebellion must be physiological as well. You need to rewire safety. This doesn't happen through force. It happens through gentleness, through breathwork, mindfulness, trauma-informed therapy, or simply sitting in a quiet room for 5 minutes without distractions. At first, this will feel like nothing. Or worse, it will feel wrong. That's how you know you're on the edge of transformation. You are teaching your body to recognize peace not as a threat, but as truth. You are undoing years of conditioning, not with violence, but with presence. And then there's self-compassion. One of the most underrated, misunderstood tools of psychological liberation. You cannot hate yourself into healing. You cannot shame yourself into worthiness. The addiction to pain thrives on self-punishment. That critical voice in your head that says you're not enough, not doing enough, not healing fast enough. That voice is not you. It's a ghost, a remnant of someone else's voice, parent, teacher, culture, that you mistook for your own. Rebellion means giving that voice a name and then disobeying it. Every time you offer yourself gentleness instead of judgment, you fracture the cycle. You teach yourself a new way to live. This rebellion also requires the courage to disappoint others, because if you've built your identity around being the one who carries everyone else's pain, who says yes to every request, who fixes, saves, and sacrifices, then breaking that pattern will provoke resistance. People may call you selfish, unkind, cold, but hear this clearly. Their discomfort is not a sign that you are wrong. It is a sign that your new boundaries are working, and if peace costs you approval, then it's still a fair trade, because there is no real freedom without the willingness to be misunderstood. Look, this isn't about becoming untouchable. It's not about avoiding pain or rejecting your past. It's about discerning, choosing, untangling the pain that still teaches you from the pain that only repeats itself. It's about finding moments, tiny, imperfect moments, where you say, "This time, I choose differently." You don't have to burn down your life. You don't have to be healed to begin. You just have to notice, interrupt, choose. And here's where it gets radical. You are allowed to feel good. You are allowed to trust peace. You are allowed to feel safe even if no one taught you how. You don't need to earn rest. You don't need to suffer to prove your strength. You don't need to repeat your parents' pain to honor their love. You can break the cycle, not by becoming someone else, but by finally becoming yourself. The self that lives beyond the trauma, beyond the pattern, beyond the pain. Nietzsche once said, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But that chaos is not the end. It's the beginning, the furnace that forges clarity, the wound that demands evolution. And when you stop letting chaos define you, when you begin dancing anyway, you become something else entirely. Not perfect, not invulnerable, but free. So if the rebellion starts with awareness, and grows with compassion, and survives through courage, where does it lead? What lies on the other side of this inner revolution, the ultimate? Truth, the final, most powerful realization. There comes a moment, quiet, almost unnoticeable. When you wake up and realize that the pain you've carried no longer fits. It doesn't feel like armor anymore. It doesn't feel like home. It feels heavy, too heavy. And not because the world suddenly became gentle or your circumstances miraculously changed. No, it feels heavy because you have changed. Something inside you, perhaps still fragile but undeniably alive, has begun to remember who you were before pain became your compass. And that remembering carries with it the deepest, most liberating truth of all. You are not your wounds. You never were. All this time, you believed your pain was proof of your depth. You believed that to be lovable, you had to suffer. That to be strong, you had to endure more than anyone else. That to be worthy, you had to hurt. But none of that was true. Your pain was never your essence. It was never the price of admission for belonging. It was just an experience, a chapter in the story, not the title of the book. The final realization is not some blinding epiphany or cosmic revelation. It's a shift, a quiet, seismic movement inside your soul that whispers, "I no longer need to suffer to feel alive." That truth, when it arrives, changes everything. You begin to see how much of your life was built around managing your pain instead of embodying your joy. You see how many of your choices, your career, your relationships, your beliefs were made from a place of coping rather than creating. And now, standing at the edge of this realization, you begin to grieve. Not just the wounds themselves, but the years spent living as if they were your identity. You grieve the lost moments of peace, the smiles you didn't trust, the people you pushed away because love felt unsafe. And in that grief, something unexpected rises. Compassion. Not just for yourself, but for everyone who is still caught in the cycle you've begun to escape. You see the world with softer eyes. You recognize pain in others not as weakness, but as echo. You no longer need to judge or fix. You simply understand. Philosophers like Viktor Frankl taught that meaning is not found in pleasure or even achievement, but in how we respond to suffering. But what if the highest form of meaning isn't just to endure pain with grace, but to transcend the need for it altogether? What if the soul's real evolution begins when we no longer define ourselves by how well we carry burdens, but by how freely we let them go? This is the ultimate truth. Pain is a door, but the door is not meant to be your home. It is meant to be opened, walked through, and closed behind you. If you stay at the threshold too long, you forget what lies beyond. You begin to feel into new territory, uncharted emotional landscapes that once terrified you. Stillness, joy, trust, intimacy without chaos, success without self-betrayal, peace without the tension of waiting for it to end. And you will feel awkward here. You'll question whether you belong. You'll sabotage a few moments just to see if the ground is real. That's okay. Healing isn't a straight line. It's a spiral. But with every return to stillness, every act of choosing calm over chaos, you write a new chapter in the story of your nervous system. You redefine safety. You rebuild identity, not around what happened to you, but around who you're becoming. And that who is vast, complex, unfinished. You are not just the child who was hurt, not just the adult who survived. You are the artist of your becoming, the author of your own unfolding. You no longer need to wear your wounds like credentials. You no longer need to prove your value by how much you can endure. You were always enough, before the pain, beneath the pain, beyond the pain. The world didn't too. Each knew this. Maybe your parents didn't either. But now, standing here with nothing left to prove, you can finally begin to believe it. And once you do, you will start to see the world differently. You will no longer be drawn to relationships that mirror your wounds. You will no longer tolerate chaos as a baseline. You will notice your own peace and protect it like sacred ground. Not because you're healed perfectly, not because pain won't revisit you, it will. But now you know the truth. Pain is not your home. It is not your lover. It is not your name. There is something else waiting for you now, something more radical than suffering, more subversive than pain. Joy. Real joy. Not the fragile kind that breaks the moment you stop watching it, but the kind that lives in your bones, the kind you don't have to earn, the kind that just is. It will feel unfamiliar at first, like trying on a garment that's too bright for your eyes. But wear it anyway. Adjust to the light. You've lived in the dark long enough. So here is your invitation, now that you've walked through the fire. Live. Not just survive, not just manage, not just perform, but live, unapologetically, tenderly, wholly. Allow yourself to want more than just not hurting. Let that be the floor, not the ceiling. Create a life that doesn't revolve around avoiding pain, but around cultivating beauty, connection, presence, meaning. This is your rebellion. This is your return. And if ever you forget, if ever the pull of old wounds returns and the shadows try to reclaim their place in your heart, remember this: you are not broken. You are breaking free.